And that film went on to break box office records. That album did so as well. And the man who was behind the plan, the man who's been behind many plans, have to be.
Yes.
Whether it was Janis Joplin, Bruce Springsteen, Alicia Keys, Puffy Combs, Billy Joel, Usher, TLC, Maroon 5, Whitney Houston, Miles Davis, Earth, Wind, and Fire. I mean, the list goes, Steven Tyler. The list goes on and on and on. And also the man behind the plan for All City Productions, which was an independent production company that he signed to a production deal back in the year 2000 or so, owned by Sway and King Tech.
That's you.
That's me.
I know.
All right? The man responsible for that is here. The one and only legendary Clive Davis has joined us again. Mr. Davis.
Nice to be here. Great to be here.
Nice to have you on the show to talk about this new documentary, Clive Davis, the soundtrack of our lives, which is premiering. Let me see. When is this premiering? It'll be a limited theatrical run starting September 27 in selected cities, and it will be released exclusively on Apple Music October the 3rd.
That's it.
Right. And this answers so many questions because as a youth, there were people like Russell Simmons, Berry Gordy, and yourself that I admired and wanted to be like. And because you guys were music people first. As successful as you became as business people, it was all about the song. When did you first decide that music is the route you wanted to steer your career?
You know, I never decided it. So
Okay.
for your audience, I had no clue.
Okay.
I lost my parents when I was a teenager. I had no money. So I studied to be a lawyer. And by luck, I got into a firm that represented Columbia Records. And after 3 years out of law school, they came to me and they asked me to become counsel for Columbia. And 5 years later, I was offered to be president
of Columbia Records. No.
So I had no clue I had ears. I had no clue that music would become my passion, which, of course, it did.
How did you discover you had ears? Because ears are the rarest thing in the game. The man with the ears lasts the longest. How did you?
Well, my epiphany was at the Monterey Pop Festival, and I was one of the very, very, very few executives there, and I saw Janis Joplin and Big Brother and the holding company, and I knew that I was in the midst of a cultural, social, and musical revolution. So that, step by step, I signed Joplin and Big Brother, and then I signed Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Chicago and Santana and Earth, Wind, and Fire, and only the affirmation of that. Because I was seeing maybe 50 other artists, and I chose those artists. And it was really just the positive feedback. These artists started breaking, not just in the U.S., but all over the world. And then I wondered, how do you get Columbia in R&B music? And I made a deal. I used smarts, common sense, with Gamble and Huff. And we started Philadelphia. So we had the OJs and Teddy Pendergrass and me and Mrs. Jones. And by trial, by experience, I just trusted my instinct.
Gamble and Huff in the documentary mentioned that one of the things that separated you from a lot of other executives is your relationship, your ability to communicate with the artists about their art and even convince artists to do things that they probably was unfavored to. Case in point is Miles Davis, somebody that you had to convince to perform in an arena that he probably didn't think would be beneficial to him.
Well, Miles came to me. He was very upset when I signed Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago, and he really wanted off the label. He said, God, these guys are selling millions, and I'm selling 75,000. So I convinced him that he cannot just play jazz clubs, that I would get him artists to tour colleges, Fillmore East, Fillmore West, be seen by youth, be seen by those people buying records. And so, yeah, he put himself in my hands, and he played with Santana and Lauren Nero and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And with Bitches Brew, he broke through big time.
How do you, because you dealt with a lot of artists that outside of their artistry dealt with a lot of personal issues, whether it was divided families, they came from broken homes, whether it was substance abuse. Miles Davis has been documented as someone who had, used different substances. Whitney Houston, obviously. When it becomes more than just the business and the music, you have to make a decision to get personally invested in people beyond their art. But that could be dangerous at the same time. But you went ahead and took that dive with many artists. Why is that?
Really, the only artist that I got involved with is Whitney.
Okay.
And the story of Whitney and myself is dramatically told in this documentary called The Soundtrack of Our Lives. And I was perhaps in denial at the beginning, but ultimately this incredible woman with this incredible voice, after we had had 7 #1 records, after she broke into film with the greatest movie soundtrack, Bodyguard, of all time, I did see her, at the Michael Jackson Madison Square Garden concert, and she was a skeleton and no longer could make up or anything, really put me on the wrong path to discovery. And so, of course, then I got very active, and I met with her. I wrote to her. The film shows me reading the actual letters that I sent to Whitney and begged her that she would lose this battle. Nobody wins the battle against drugs. And in a very moving way, it takes the two of us through those years. It takes it right at the beginning. It shows 2 weeks after I discovered her and put her on the Merv Griffin show, and you see that voice, and you see all the success, and then you see the struggle.
Yeah.
And there's no one. A review just came out saying there's no one seeing this film. They will laugh, but they'll cry also.
Well, you relive, because I was there the day that they found her body at the hotel the night of the party, of your Grammy party, because I always, you would always come talk to me on the red carpet, and you made me look like I was big time. I always wanted to say thank you. I appreciate that. I haven't been back to your party since. Not because I don't like a great party, because it's the best one there is the music business has ever seen. I was all up in it. I remember how the mood was that day. And the show kept going. It was the fact that people celebrated her life that night was so necessary. It was almost therapeutic that you continued with the party that night.
Well, that was the toughest decision. Obviously, I was in shock, but there was a musical community that needed to be together.
Yeah.
There was Whitney, who was there every year, whether performing or just being at that party. And I said, look, we've got to celebrate her life. We've got to. Puffy was great, Puffy Combs, putting it in the right perspective. And there were artists like Tony Bennett and Diana Krall and the Kinks all had flown in. So like the Grammys, we went on, but we celebrated the life of Whitney.
Clive Davis is here. The new documentary is The Soundtrack of Our Lives. It'll be on limited releases in selected cities September 27, and it's coming out on Apple Music October the 3rd. DB got a chance. This is DB right here. He got a chance to watch as well.
How you doing?
Right there.
Oh, how are you?
I'm just wondering because a lot of the artists that are highlighted in this documentary, I think one of the most interesting parts about it were the artists that weren't successful that you had faith in and that you signed and you really had a lot of aspirations for. Who was the most memorable, do you think, that you really wanted to succeed but just couldn't find that niche with an audience?
There was a band called the Alpha Band, and the centerpiece of that band, the founder of that band, has broken through. The Alpha Band itself did not. The founder of the band was T-Bone Burnett, and T-Bone has become a major force in music, but the Alpha Band had everything. They had an electric violinist, David Mansfield, that would go out in the audience and electrify them. T-Bone was the centerpiece. They didn't come up with hits during their recording period. So, yeah, my hope for them was much greater than what they were able to realize.
Right.
Can you clear up a story that I heard, and I'm not sure how it went, but is it true that you were responsible for this idea of bringing Wyclef together with Carlos Santana, that there was an issue about him and coming out with that album that was so big, it ended up big and bringing Carlos to a new generation, but I'd heard that it was you who said maybe he should work with Wyclef.
Well, that's true, but I'm going to amplify it just
Okay.
so that, and you'll see it in the documentary. I had signed Carlos Santana in 1969,
Right.
maybe 2 years after I signed Joplin. We had enormous success. Oh, you come
Absolutely.
about, Black Magic Woman, Evil Ways. And then when I formed Arista, we separated. He stayed on Columbia. I founded Arista in 1975. So fast forward 23 years. And he asked me to go see him at Radio City Music Hall. I had not seen him in those 2 decades.
Wow.
So I saw him, and we got together and we made a pact. Half the album would be Santana at his fiery, dazzling guitar best, and half the album would be based on material that I would look to, would not bastardize his creative integrity, but with artists, with writers. So I came up with Smooth, that has become probably the biggest single of all time,
Right.
with Rob Thomas. And I looked to Wyclef, and he came up with Maria Maria. I loved it. We both on the phone played it for Santana, who was in San Francisco. He loved it. Wyclef got Product G&B. He stayed in the picture. Maria Maria became the second huge hit of Supernatural. Supernatural won 9 Grammys, selling 26 million copies. As Ahmet Ertegun once said, I really got to take my hat off. He was a guitarist in his mid-50s and who didn't sing himself, and yet the album sold 26 million copies.
Wow.
Crazy.
Wow.
Clive, what do you think is the role of record labels right now? Because we see a lot of artists who definitely take the independent route and are hella successful with it, and it's also glorified a lot. And in a lot of ways, sometimes people, like for instance, Atlantic Records, they signed a girl that went viral off of an episode for Dr. Phil, and a lot of people are like, why the hell would they do that? So people just don't look at record labels the same way. How do you feel like record labels can boost up their status?
I think people are wrong. I think record labels are a vital part of the long term of any career. When you look at my documentary, you will see artists that I signed 35, 40 years ago, and they're still headlining today. It's if artists don't write, they need material. They need an expertise from A&R people to help them find those songs. If they do write, they need to be marketed. They need to be coming to radio stations like this. Radio plays a vital role still in the digital revolution. And so you must pay your respects. You do have to keep in touch with radio. And whether it's the people who work in social media, whether it's people that when they need advertising or marketing, there's so much to be done. It's not just, okay, I'm an artist and I might have a hit song. They'll fail in developing their career unless they don't have great people around them.
So if there was an 18-year-old who was just popping on SoundCloud, was the king or queen of SoundCloud, and they came to you and said, what do you think should be my next move? I've raised enough money where I can self-invest and go the independent route and own everything, but I also have these labels knocking on my door. Which path would you say they should choose?
I definitely recommend the label path.
Okay.
The label path.
Definitely.
Clive Davis, ladies and gentlemen. It's not enough time in the day to talk to him. The soundtrack of our lives. Don't forget, September 27th, you'll see special screenings in selected cities. October 3rd, they'll be released on Apple Music. If you were to be able to look back, look at your career, not look back because you always look forward, what do you hope your legacy reads to folks?
I think that it would include someone unsuspectingly found music as a passion, found a natural gift that he never knew was there. And whether it was self-contained artists, or whether it was artists like Aretha and Whitney and Dionne Warwick, helped find the material that kept their careers alive, healthy, and being nurtured. So I do feel this film, not only do I find for the preview audiences that they stand and exult in the joy of all the music. There are 105 music cues in this documentary, but they cry. They do cry at different parts of the film because with love and sensitivity, the real and true up and down story of Whitney Houston is like never before. So I'm honestly thrilled. It never plays without a 3 or 4 minute standing ovation. It's reaffirming. And for me, I was an executive, but then I became, in cases like Whitney, I picked every song with my A&R staff that she was to sing. We were creative, collaborative partners. And what was most moving is seeing artists that I hadn't seen in 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
Simon and Garfunkel in the film, Springsteen, Patti Smith, The Grateful Dead, along with Aretha and Dionne and Alicia and Jennifer Hudson. So I know what they mean to me, but to hear what I meant to them.
Yeah.
But I got to say one thing, Sway.
Yeah.
My life did not go up, up, up. I was fired for Columbia Records in a witch hunt. I had to be resilient. That film shows a check for $1 million that CBS paid me when they didn't want anything to do for me. That revelation is startling, and you hear gasps in the audience. Many years later, I only had 2 sort of challenges in a long career. Arista felt I was making too much money, not the label, but the German owners. And they said, why don't you move into a consultant capacity? Well, I had just produced My Love Is Your Love, Santana's Supernatural. I was just inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and had gotten a lifetime. I wasn't going anywhere. And they found that they had to ultimately give Arista back to me, give me RCA, give me Jive. And of course, the most thrilling moment is that 18 out of 18, all top executives, when I started Jay with Busta Rhymes, with Luther Vandross, with Alicia Keys, when you and I met those years, they really saw that they gave me the whole ball of wax back again. So I think it's inspiring.
It's
how
very
long a
inspiring.
career could last and what you've got to go through
To get it, right? And still getting it. And still doing it.
No, I'm involved. I'm unveiling next week. Johnny Mathis, I put on at this party. He slayed the audience. Taylor Swift, Miley, Puffy. Couldn't believe Johnny Mathis. So I've come up with the concept. Johnny Mathis sings the great new American songbook.
Wow.
And I have Babyface producing it, and Mathis does Adele, does Just the Way You Are, Bruno Mars, does Hallelujah, really in peak voice. I'm working with Jennifer Hudson, and on her album, I love the idea of a big voice. And I've got a brand new young artist named Avery Wilson that I think has an incredible voice at 21. We've just got to find the right material and make sure that urban mainstream is not so dominated by hip-hop that they don't give the next Luther, Maxwell, the next Aretha, the next Whitney a chance to be heard.
Clive Davis, ladies and gentlemen. Honor to have you on the show. Come back anytime, man. Anytime. Tell Keith, I don't know if you still stay in touch with Keith Nafley. I know Larry Jackson. These are all people I came up in the game with, we work with, that you eventually hired. And
listen, Larry Jackson is now head of creative content at Apple. Apple bought this film October 3rd. You're going to see it on Apple TV. You're going to get it on iTunes. So I hope you all enjoy it.
Oh, man, thank you. Clive Davis, ladies and gentlemen. Also, we want to thank DJ Envy for coming through. Supermodel Adriana Lima for coming through. Got a good show for you guys tomorrow. We're going to let Laura Sear walk up in here. And until tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, we have nothing left to say.
It's Sway in the morning, only on Shea 45.